Hello and welcome to our Farmers Weekly Transition Summit, Successful Soil. I'm Transition Editor Johan Tasker. Interest in soil science and management has exploded in recent years, and in this Transition Summit, we will be looking at the subject of soil in two parts with two expert panels. The second session, which will start in about an hour at 6 o'clock, will look at ways to improve soil health. In this first session, which begins now, we're going to be looking at ways to take stock of your soil and how the findings can be translated into real, tangible improvements in the field. But first, a special message from our partner, TerraVesta.
To respond to the devastating effects of climate change, the world needs plant-based solutions to store carbon, improve our soils, enhance biodiversity, and to develop new sustainable markets, materials and products. A solution has been developed in the UK for use across the globe, with new specifically selected non-GM hybrids of Miscanthus for use in multiple climates and markets. A crop that is perennial, increases soil fertility and stability, and stores carbon underground every year it grows. It grows effectively on marginal land, requiring very little input or maintenance and without competing with vital food production. It can even remove soil contaminants, helping to clean up hazardous substances naturally. The secret to Miscanthus' success is in the rhizomes, an underground root network which stores organic carbon in the soil every single year. Being a perennial crop, every year it shuts down growth, stores and then recycles its own nutrients, ready to grow again next season. Therefore, zero fertilizer is required. Miscanthus is proven to encourage biodiversity. As an extremely efficient converter of sunlight into energy stored in the crop, it grows prolifically. Not only is Miscanthus having a positive environmental impact when growing, it's also delivering reductions in the use of fossil fuels by powering the nation with clean, renewable energy from whole Miscanthus bales. Miscanthus is assisting food production by allowing farmers to concentrate their efforts on their most productive land. It's storing carbon in the soil, improving soil health and water quality. As well as being effective as an absorbent animal bedding, Miscanthus can replace non-renewables with a wide range of products and markets. To find out more about Miscanthus, its uses and cultivation, visit terravesta.com. TerraVesta, growing innovation naturally.
So welcome back to part one of our Farmers Weekly Transition Summit, Successful Soil, examining ways to take stock of your soil. And to discuss this, I'm joined by three very special guests, all experts in their own right. We've got Jim Stotzker, who leads on sustainability for Frontier Agriculture. Jim is responsible for developing Frontier's approach to soil health testing and advice. Next, we have David Newton, Product and Technical Manager for Timac Agro UK. David is an expert in soil health and crop nutrient efficiency. We also have Dr. Andy Evans, Applied Crop Entomologist and Nematologist for Crop Health and Protection, or CHAP, one of 4 UK centres for agricultural innovation. And welcome also to everybody else, everybody watching, and do remember that you can ask questions yourself by sending them to us during the session, and we'll do our best to get those answered. But I'm going to start with defining soil health. How do we define soil health, and what is it exactly? Jim, can we start with you, please?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Johan. Very pertinent question, obviously. So we tend to define soil health as the balance and interplay of 3 broader parameters, as in the biological, physical, and chemical makeup of soils. with the chemical makeup, meaning nutrients, pH, and such like, physical, looking at soil aggregation and water balance and soil structure, and the biological referring to anything that lives in the soil. So that can be larger creatures like earthworms, insects, etc., the microbial populations, everything in between, and of course the crops themselves. And I think one interesting aspect to look at slightly separately is organic matter, which has it really sits throughout all three, because it has an effect on all three of those parameters, being the food for the biology, helping with the soil structure, and also being part of the nutrient cycle, of course.
Andy, is that the way that you look at soil health?
Yeah, I think you've got to think about all of the functions that soil has, in terms of not just growing plants, but in terms of storing carbon. You've got recycling materials, on the microbes and so on, breaking down crop residues and so on. So it's you almost need to think of it as a kind of living organism on its own in some respects. And the fact that it's one good way to think about it is if your soil looks good, feels good, and smells good, then it's probably kind of 99% of the way there to be in a good, healthy soil. But it is useful, I think, to every now and again to actually take some sort of soil measurements to gauge how your soil is doing.
David, Andy mentioned sort of soil measurements. Where do we start when we're trying to do that?
Yeah, well, we look at a wide variety of parameters. I mean, the main soil test is always a good place to start with. pH, obviously, the indexes of P and K and magnesium, but that only gives part of the story. Looking at organic matter levels, looking at where you're at with your organic matter, knowing what influence that's having on the nutrition availability within your soil, how that's interacting with the other elements as well, things like calcium, sulfur, and so on. These are the main basic nutrients we need to know about. The key to it being not having a great deal of everything, but making sure that things are in balance, so that you haven't got an oversupply of one nutrient that is affecting the availability of others.
And it all seems quite complicated. There are all of these nutrients, all of these things to measure. It can be quite daunting. So is there a good place to start, David? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I say, just you get a soil test, get and someone in who knows how to interpret that as well is what you can do. I mean, that can be your agronomist, that can be various different nutrient advisors, being able to understand where you're at. Obviously the recommendation is that you aim for an index of 2 in most things, but that can vary depending on the type of soil you're on, where you're at in the country, and what you're dealing with. So, whether you've got a clay soil, a sand soil, or so on, will affect the levels of major nutrients that your soils can handle, and how that will affect the health of the soil that you have. The main people that know how their soils react to things are, of course, the farms themselves. They've worked the farms, they've worked the land themselves for many, many years. But it's often useful to have a chat with somebody in the area, advisors in the area that understand the interactions between different nutrients and so on, and how they can affect what is available to the crops and what you're trying to do.
Jim, there are these different tests out there. Are there some tests that make more sense than others, especially for somebody starting out and trying to get more of a handle on their soil health status?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that, again, for us, we look at those 3 main parameters and perhaps pick what we feel is the most pertinent out of those. It's really important, though, to test and to engage with each grower on what it is that they're actually looking for. So, it may be that, for example, nutrient and textural scanning is the first stop, and gives us a first good clue of what's going on. But at the same time, we can do some fairly simple stuff of just finding out what's going on, for example, in structure by doing a VES score. So just going out there with a spade and having a look for yourself, doing a worm count while you're there. That gives you some idea of what's living in there. So it can go from really very much DIY to very, very sophisticated in-lab techniques. And what we tend to do is have a chat with whoever is approaching us about it and say, what is it you're after? What part, what aspect are you trying to manage? And if it's just the first look-see, then I think getting an idea of the basic structure, the basic nutrient pH profile, textural analysis, and the organic matter content is a good start.
Mm-hmm.
Andy, where do you start? Do you carry a spade around with you?
Well, I think most growers will know if they've got a dodgy part of the field. Based on several seasons of crops, and is there always one corner or one part of the field which doesn't kind of yield well, or the crops are kind of slow to establish? And I think, go out with your spade and dig in those areas and contrast with the good parts of the field. So, for example, is the soil structure different, more compacted, for example? Are the earthworm counts different? So, it'll help kind of narrow down the part of the field that you maybe want to kind of focus on, because the whole field hopefully won't be in a bad state. It'll just be certain areas of the field, and it could go. It could all be down to compaction. It could be other reasons. So, yes, I know you don't go out with a spade all the time, but I think it's on a day when it's suitable, just dig a few bits, have a look at the soil structure. As Jim said, do the VES test, which is there for those who don't know, is the visual. I can never remember what it stands for now. Visual evaluation of soil structure, and just have a sniff, like I said earlier, sniff and smell and look at the soil, and it'll give you an idea of how it contrasts with some of, say, the good parts of the field.
David, Andy mentions compaction there. That is still a problem on many farms. How best to alleviate it, do you think?
Well, yeah, just to sort of back up what Andy said there. I mean, I've done a lot of farm talks and talked to farmers around the countryside, and I'm always surprised at the lack of show of hands when I ask people how many people walk their fields with a spade on a regular basis just to have a look at compaction, because it is a major problem, and it is an aspect, I think, of modern farming that we have to deal with. That it's something that we accept is going to happen because of the way we work with the machinery we work with, the crops that we're growing, and so on. And looking at what suits you in order to alleviate compaction, it can be something, as in grassland especially, something as simple as getting out with a soil splitter once or twice a year just to open up the surface of the soil, or making sure that you're maybe in a more arable, something a bit more dramatic, like subsoiling or getting some metal through the soil at some point. I mean, there's a lot of moving towards reduced tillage and reduced interventions with the soils, which is great. It really helps the soil health, keeping a soil stability there, not moving soil too often. However, you need to, before you enter into this sort of method of farming, you need to make sure that you're not preserving issues by not sorting out something, that you have deep compaction, making sure that you've got drainage, that water is transferring through the soil in a slow and steady way. You want water to be held where plants can get at it, but you don't want it to sit there too long. You want to make sure that you can get air into the soil, that there's oxygen getting down at least to most of the root depth, so that because the roots can respire and function correctly, and the biology can interact with those roots in order for nutrition to be available. So it's looking at the system you're working, looking at the situation you're in, and intervening accordingly. but don't be afraid to actually go out there and look and find out what you've got. Yeah.
Thanks. A lot of these issues are covered, of course, in the RB209 Soil Health Index from the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board as perhaps a baseline for starting forwards in a better understanding of soil science. And this is a question that we've had through from Christian Murray. Can I start with you, Jim? I mean, do you recognise the AHDB RB209 Soil Health Index as the baseline for a better understanding of soil science?
Well, interesting. So we've been part of the AHDB Great Soils Partnership. It's one of the industry partners on there, and I think that our understanding of soil health, and again also how to measure it, and from the sort of most basic to the more sophisticated way, has gained a lot of ground through that. So, for example, we're looking at a scorecard system together with them to see whether that can be used to really understand and pinpoint what's going on in soil. So yes, of course, it's working with all of the research, all of the knowledge that's out there, and also being at the forefront of the research that's happening right now to put together the most appropriate ways of measurement packages, isn't it?
Andy, how about you? Do you use the RB209 index?
Yes, I mean, well, everybody's got their own index really, but I think it's important. I think that if you do whatever index that you use, you stick with that one. You can't kind of mix and match different kind of approaches. And I think the key thing really is if you've got a good kind of measurement of your soil, say this season, and whether it's RB209 or any other one where you've got your kind of baseline level, then it's worth going back in maybe 5 or 6 years to see whatever measures you were recommended to take, whether it's putting more cover crops on or improving farmyard manure or whatever onto the land to boost organic matter. The key thing is to try and then in a few years' time see whether that's made a difference to your benchmark level, because just bunging stuff on and then your crops have not improved, or if you haven't got any sort of measure then in a few years' time that things have improved, then you're in some respects you're back to square one. You need to have some sort of idea of the measures that you're taking and then seeing whether they're actually making an improvement.
And I guess it's not so much just going back in time or after a few years. You've got to go back to the same place because
exactly, yeah. But, with GPS and everything now, you can go back to the same spot in the field. So as I mentioned earlier, if you've got a dodgy part of the field, you can go back to that in 5 or 6 years' time, knowing you're exactly in the same spot. You don't have to kind of look at how many meters am I from that pylon and that funny looking tree in the corner of the field. You can actually get a very specific measurement using GPS, so it's so you can go back to the exact spot.
And not everybody's going to have GPS, but we can use apps, I guess, for things like what 3 words?
Yes, yeah.
David, is that something that you'd concur with? It's important to test, to go back, to recognise the variability within fields, both in terms of location and over time as well.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of good developments coming on. Yeah, you mentioned the what 3 words app. We use that quite frequently to be able to pinpoint places where we're at and where we're taking measurements from. And it is, I think I agree with the other two speakers that the RB209 is a great place to start. It's a great place to set your baseline with. And it is very, very important to measure where you're at, because otherwise you don't know where to go. Because, as I say, you haven't got a baseline measurement, you haven't got a starting point. How can you know where you get to? Yes, again, another sort of frustrations of ours in the past is someone saying to us, well, yes, we've worked with you for like 2 years now, we've not seen any improvement. And it's like, yes, but how did you measure that? again, I say we don't. You can get very, but I say you can get very obsessed with testing everything and with measuring everything, and you can take everything into the very finest degree. And I'm a big fan of maybe taking a little step back from that and just making sure that you're on a realistic path to where you want to get to. The other thing I would want to mention at this point is there is some quite good steps forward now in the available satellite data that is freely available, and there's lots of different packages coming out which people are offering where you can use satellite imagery. It's quite frightening now to know how often we're being photographed from space on a daily basis. But there's some good crop interpretations from that. There's some interpretations of things like leaf area index over the size, over the area of the field, looking at vegetation growth, looking at vegetation color, and you can interpret a lot of different things from that without even leaving the comfort of your own home. So there's a lot of good stuff available out there now that the technology is really starting to come up to help people with this sort of measurement.
We've got a question here from Peter Betts. We were talking about technology, GPS, satellites, that kind of thing. Peter is a farmer. He says, don't make it complicated. If your soil is good, it will be full of fungi. Does it grow mushrooms? Jim, what do you think to that?
Well, so mushrooms are the fruiting bodies of a very particular type of fungus. So that doesn't necessarily tell you everything that's going on in there. I think that if you wanted to have a simple measure of soil biology, probably worms are the way forward. So a worm count takes you right to the top of the food chain and tells you a story of what's going on through the micro and mesofauna into the microbial life lower down in that food chain, as it were. So I'm not going to go into the intricacies of mycorrhizal fungi and ectomycorrhizae and fruiting bodies, but might not be the best indicator.
Yeah, I think when you bear in mind that 1 teaspoon of soil might contain up to about 1 billion different organisms in it, about 10,000 different species, from from bacteria, fungi, nematodes, and there's lots of there's good nematodes, not just the bad ones, and you've got protozoa, algae. All of these organisms interact, and as Jim just said, the worms are at the top of the food chain, but there are thousands of other organisms further down which are playing a very important role in maintaining the health of the soil, whether it's breaking down organic matter, storing carbon, and so on and so forth. So it's that we can't look at everything, but there are some advances kind of coming on, and the earthworm is a reasonable kind of simple account, but you could go down the other level and look at things like nematode diversity, for example, which is a good indicator of how healthy your soil is. But then that's going down the kind of you pay for what you get, really. And but again, all of these can be useful and very much dependent on each grower's situation.
And Peter Betts, the farmer who asked that question, Peter, I don't know if you're still online, but if you want to come back on that, do drop us another question. And a quick reminder for anybody else who wants to ask a question, please do send it through, and we'll try and get it answered. I mean, in terms of earthworms, it's not just about nutrients and microorganisms. They're also a good indication of a good soil structure as well. Andy, do you want to comment on that again?
Yeah, there are different types of them. Some earthworms kind of just live quite deep in the soil, and there are other ones which are nearer the soil surface. As a basic rule of thumb, the more worms you've got, the better. But again, it's been shown that there's a very good correlation with earthworm number and kind of improvements in crop yield. So. But as I said earlier, though, the earthworms are just a kind of tip. As the top of the kind of trophic level, you've got all these other organisms below. And the thing is, encouraging all of these other organisms by the addition of organic matter or growing cover crops and so on, and aerating the soil, they will play a role in keeping some of the pathogens, the crop pathogens and pests down. So, we want to maintain this kind of soil diversity of microbial activity so that they can kind of play an important role in keeping some of the pests and diseases down. And then if we're not putting pesticides on to target those particular problems, then again, you're encouraging and protecting the microbes which are in the soil.
Jim, would you concur with that?
Yeah, completely. Absolutely. I think that we have to be interested in diversity as well as numbers of things. So as we just heard, for example, earthworms, we tend to think of the three main groups of earthworms there, the top litter dwelling earthworms and the top soil dwelling ones and the deeper level ones. And if we find that they're quite easy, again, to identify, and the AHDB has some very good guides on that. So again, it's one of those things that we tend to teach people to do on their own farms. That gives you a level of understanding of, at least within that, of diversity already. You could then go to the other end, as it were, and do a simple assessment of microbial activity via a respiration test. Again, pretty standard stuff, and most labs will offer that. That looks at microbial activity. It doesn't look at what microbes are there, but it looks at least how much life there is, how much activity there is. And so therefore, what kind of nutrient turnover we may be able to look for. So again, also talking about organic matter, that is absolutely vital. I think when it comes down to the most fundamental things for me are organic matter and structure. What's there, then we'll be able to live and thrive, basically, if we add those things in.
Organic matter and structure. And David, how do we get more organic matter into our soils? There's some suggestion that that many soils are not as healthy as they might be, yet they're the lifeblood of UK farming and food production. So organic matter, how do we get more organic matter into our soils?
The obvious way is chucking it on the surface from using machinery with compost, with farmyard manure, with digestates and so on like that. There's the difficulty with that is availability, especially in the current situation when fertilizer is a little bit pricey. People are hanging on to their organic matter quite swiftly at the moment, and so they should, because it's very valuable type stuff. Looking again at your cropping, looking at intercropping, cover cropping, and bringing in extra crops into the rotation. I mean, one of the best ways to increase organic matter in soils is grow a crop of grass for a while. The rooting capacity of grass, if you grow a crop of grass and cut it once or twice, you're adding quite a large amount of organic matter into the soil, because every time you cut a crop of grass, you are sacrificing roots to regenerate that grass. And by sacrificing those roots, you're adding to the organic matter of the soil. So looking at ways in which to make sure that your soil is covered with something, it's always growing something. That way that you're always introducing more organic matter from that. The other thing, talking about organic matter, is to be careful about what you're applying and when and how. There's a lot of things about and understanding the implications of things like digestates and so on like that. Some of them, they're all very good sources of organic matter, but some are higher in phosphate, some are higher in potash, some might be introducing some heavy metals or so on, depending on the source of the organic matter into your system. So, I started out by saying balance is important. And again, it's always a case of understanding things in mediocrity, or, understanding what it is you're applying into the soil. And the needs of the crop, or the needs of the situation that you're putting it into. So yes, there's lots of great different types of organic matter, but I say one of the best ways of accumulating it is by growing it.
I mean, even growing cover crops over the winter, and then when you plough them in the spring, that can put organic matter in. And for some cover crops, for example, things like oil radish, they can quite deep rooting. So if you have compaction issues, for example, on the farm or on the field, then putting something in which can break through the pan, which can be quite a distance below the soil surface, can be beneficial. And then obviously you've got those roots then when the crop's been chopped and ploughed in to contribute again to more organic matter in the soil. So I think, as David said, try not to leave fields bare. So depending on the season, if, for example, you miss your window to try and get, a winter wheat in or whatever, or a winter barley, then whack in a cover crop just to make sure that the soil isn't bare over the winter. Because, as we've seen, bare soils tend to get flooded. And again, if you've got a crop growing in the soil, there's more potential then for drainage to occur, particularly on a sort of heavy kind of clay type soil. So I think a key message really is just don't have soils bare, at least for long periods.
And just to pick on something else you said there, the deep rooting crops are really handy as well for regenerating soils, because they're drawing up trace elements and minerals from deeper down in the soil structure. So all of a lot of the trace elements that we're short of in the soil surface, molybdenum, manganese, a lot of the metals, the zincs, boron, and so on, a lot of these are found deeper down in the soil profile. So by introducing a deeper rooting crop and then, as you say, ploughing it or chopping it in or just turning it into add to the organic matter of the soil, you're also introducing these trace elements back into the system, which are often forgotten about when we're thinking about crop nutrition.
And soil organic matter contributes to soil productivity in many ways. How do we go about measuring it, Jim? I mean, how do you do it, and how deep do you go, as it were, at Frontier Ag?
So we go with two different specific soil measures. We use the DUMAS method, but we also still use the loss on ignition, or LOI method. Our opinion is that the DUMAS is the more reliable method. It involves the soil being combusted at about 1,000 degrees Celsius, and then the carbon being measured, and then the carbon content is converted back to organic matter content, on the understanding that 58% of organic matter is carbon. It's a very standardized process, and it's reliable in its repeatability. So as far as the methodologies that are there at the moment, we feel that it's the most reliable. Loss on ignition tends to burn the sample at a lower temperature, and it can be varying temperatures depending on protocol and lab. So we may have some unreliabilities in that sense, and there are also some issues around clay content, which the water, structural waters in that can be misread as organic matter, and also calcareous, calcium-rich soils can be misread at times. So it's not quite as accurate perhaps, but because we know that a lot of people were using LOI in the past, and we want them to be able to use those benchmarks that they set in the past, we report both measures on all of our soil reports, and feel that that's the right way forward. What we tend to do is we give, we don't just put that out there, we give the advice with that and the interpretation, so that when there is variation between the two and the LOI comes out higher than the DUMAS, for example, we will explain why that may be, and also seek to understand why that may be on that particular soil.
And how deep do you go, Jim?
We go to on the more comprehensive tests that we do down to 25 centimeters, because we also look at soil biology in those. So we have been reassessing that process over the last few months, and we think that is where, for organic matter as a standard, we will go to 25 centimeters. We were going to 15 on texture and nutrients only in the past, which is, I think, acceptable for that. But because we want to get a deeper understanding of what happens biologically at deeper levels as well, 25 seems more accurate for us now.
And David, is that the same for you?
We still sort of test down to around about sort of 15 centimeters. Again, we're perhaps not quite as scientific as Jim at times. But I totally agree with what he's saying about the soil organic matter tests. GMAS is by far the most accurate measure. But you can get, again, it depends on your soil, it depends on the crop, it depends on where you are. To try and give this is the depth you need to go to for the whole of the UK, when, you know, I've got soils down here in Cornwall, which if I can find 25 centimeters of soil, I'm doing really well. And yet you go up into the silts and the clays, and you can go down for as far as you want to go to get an assessment to follow the roots down. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's understanding the situation that's right for you on your farm to give you that measure and that baseline. But I think, you know, Jim's probably right in talking down to 25 centimeters is where the action is basically in a soil. You know, we would like roots tend to get down to 10, 15, 20 centimeters. If you're looking at grassland, you would want them to get down a little bit further. But again, we're working with soils that are compacted. We're working with soils that aren't as healthy as they could be. So getting that base measurement for your farm, look at what you're doing, look at how you can improve it.
Thanks, David. Just a quick sort of message to Anne Wilcox. Anne, I've seen your question. I'm going to ask it a little bit later on, but thank you for that. And to anybody else, do keep your questions coming and send them to us. Andy, does going deeper give us a deeper understanding of soil organic matter?
Well, I think what what both David and Jim have just said is that, you know, that's where the action is, and I think, you know, the microbial activity is going to be where the organic matter is and where all the action is, and particularly when you've got the roots down there, a lot of the exudates coming off the roots of the crop that you're growing, they're feeding the microbial the microbes which are around there, and those microbes will then be breaking down organic matter and so on and so forth. And so it's, you know, nearer the surface, there's still going to be microbes and everything up there, and there's still obviously going to be some organic matter on the surface, but it's deeper down, I think, at that sort of level, at the sort of 15 to 25 range, which is really where you're probably wanting to get a kind of standard measure done. And I think really the key thing is once you've had a measure taken at a particular depth, then when you go back to that field or that area of the field in a few years' time, make sure you do exactly the same process, because otherwise you can't really compare what you did today with 5 years later if you're not sampling that to the same depth and in the same part of the field.
Thanks, Andy. There's a couple of questions here for a couple of farmers. First one from Mark Exelby. He's saying, how does cutting a grass crop increase soil organic matter? And is it the same process with red clover as well? David, I'll ask that one to you.
Yeah, so when you've got a grass crop, the reserves of the crop are in the roots. So if you cut the grass, take away the top, in order to regenerate that, to grow some extra leaf, you have to draw some reserves. So you draw reserves from that root. So you draw the sugars, you draw in the protein and so on from the roots that have been stored down there. And that basically the crop sacrifices some of the root mass in order to regrow the top leaf. So each time you cut, when you go out with your spade, as we've been telling you to, and have a look in your grass sward and you dig it up, you will see a difference. You'll see brown roots, you'll see white roots, and you'll be able to understand some of those roots that you'll see there are not actually alive. They're the roots that have been sacrificed to set up the growth for that season. Because, as I say, it's where the reserves are. And so once those roots have been sacrificed, that's when the soil biology gets to work on it, the fungus, the bacteria, to break down those roots, to give it that initial primary mineralization, which releases a certain amount of nutrition back into the soil, to form the stable humus. which is the organic matter that we want to measure, that we want to know, we want to understand. That's the organic matter that helps to store nutrition within the soil, and that's the organic matter that you can draw upon over a longer period of time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
Jim, how about you?
Sorry. Yes. I mean, I think that, yeah, that is about right. And I think that clearly we are looking at that interplay of the actual organic matter that is there and the exudates, but also the microbial populations themselves. Because what we need to remember is that dead microbes and other dead biology in the soil makes up that pool of organic matter itself as well. So when we have systems that encourage more microbial activity, so for example, you quickly mentioned clovers there, which we know to be quite microbially active due to the rhizobian activity that they have, etc. You then create more microbial life, which creates a bigger pool of dead bodies, as it were, which go into that organic matter pool. It sounds grim, but actually is a really, really fundamental part of that organic matter cycle.
Another question here from farmer Andrew Wilson. I'm going to put this one to you, Andy. Powering organic matter in isn't the best way to utilise it. I mean, there is a difference between organic matter on the surface and soil organic matter, yes?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, a lot of the organic matter on the surface will kind of disappear to some extent because it's, through soil erosion, and it'll kind of get dried out and possibly, get blown away or whatever. Whereas, what you really want is the organic matter to get into the ground, and not necessarily through ploughing, but, even through kind of things like min-till, where you can just get a bit of the organic, break up the kind of clumpy bits depending on the organic matter that you're putting on. You can break it up so you haven't got big clumps. And this is where the likes of the earthworms and stuff come in, because they will be coming up onto the surface and their burrows allow a route for some of that material to get deeper into the soil. So you can keep that organic matter kind of at the kind of top end of the soil profile, and then you've got the organic matter from the roots from your previous crops and so on, which kind of make up the stuff deeper in the soil. So you've almost got kind of two kind of sources of organic matter to some extent. But again, when you leave kind of crop residue in the ground, after harvesting oilseed rape, for example, that can be beneficial because that will break down and ultimately contribute to the organic matter in the particularly in the upper levels of the soil.
I think we need to make the distinctions as well between fresh organic matter and stable organic matter, or the composted, partially composted organic matter within the soil, which is what makes up the humus within soil. Because fresh organic matter is quite volatile. It's quite, but the nutrition within it is quite locked away. Mm-hmm. And that's where we need this soil activity. We need, Andy's friends, the worms and the microbes, to carry out that first breakdown of fresh organic matter into what we think of as compost, the black material that we see within soil, and that's what really helps the soil health to prosper, because levels of that really helps to, as I say, to preserve and to store nutrition. And to feed bacteria and to feed all of that sort of microbial life, is that result of the initial breakdown of fresh organic matter. So make a distinction between the fresh organic matter and the sort of the stable organic matter we measure within the soil.
And when we measure it, I mean, the different soil types are going to have different soil organic matter potential. But generally speaking, I mean, Jim, what sort of organic matter content should we be looking at? And I know that's probably how long is a piece of string, or it's going to. The answer, I guess, is going to be it depends. But give us a clue.
Right. Yes. Well done. Yes, you've set me up for exactly that answer there. Well done. No. So what we do know and understand that is organic matter potential, and the accumulation of organic matter is very much linked to texture. So what we need to look at is, if we texturally understand what we have, a lighter soil will accumulate less organic matter than a more clay-rich soil, a heavier soil. So therefore, if I go, we've got we've got a soil life farm in Norfolk, for example, where we're looking at organic matter levels of 2 to 3% at the moment. Very, very sandy soil. Could be better, but isn't anything that I'm going to be terribly upset about just right now. So we'd be working towards better, but it's not the end of the world. Whereas if I go to our soil life farm here in Kent, which is clay over chalk, if I saw that kind of level, I'd be alarmed. So we'd be looking at 5 or 6%. That would probably set our hearts at a little bit more ease. And I'm talking about DUMAS levels here as well, just to clarify that. Because again, those LOI levels can look quite different. But yeah, I think it's a good start to say, what kind of texture do I have, to look at how much might I be able to accumulate. We touched on it earlier on about benchmarking within a field. So one thing that we can do is look again at a sort of problematic area and a benchmark area. So I might go, for example, last week I was out at a farm in Norfolk. They had a pylon in the field, big electric jobby, and we just had a little dig under that, which gave us a really good clue as to how that soil could look in terms of texture, how many worms there could be in that soil in comparison to the arable portion. And now, of course, we're never going to achieve that. We need to grow food and produce food off of the land, so I'm under no illusion there, but it gives us an idea of where we could move to. So we may be able to benchmark, for example, the potential for organic matter accumulation in a soil by looking at those undisturbed areas around margins, hedgerows, etc. But also always keeping in mind that throughout a field, we may have different textural areas. And as we've said earlier, I think that farmers tend to be the biggest experts in their fields, and they will know quite well what grows where and what area is tricky and so on, and will probably have a fairly good understanding of what makes a good place to look and what makes a more complicated place to look, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Jim. Andy, do you go digging around under pylons looking for good soil samples? Where's the best place?
Be a bit dangerous with a metal spade, I think, but no, I agree. When you look at a field, particularly a field that's kind of may have had a hedgerow, for example, and been taken out, even sort of 20 or 30 years ago, you can see the difference. You can see where the hedgerow was, for example, and quite often looking there, you'll get some sort of idea of what the kind of potential part for that field is from that kind of what had been relatively undisturbed up until maybe sort of say 10 or 20 years ago, whenever the hedgerow was taken out. But I suppose the list of kind of do's and don'ts. The obvious thing is don't take soil samples around where the gates are, no entries into field, and also areas where there's a continually every year when it rains, there's always water kind of lying, because those areas, you can take soil samples from there if you wish to, but you just know that they're not going to be much good compared to the rest of the field. And I know it was mentioned earlier about with satellite imagery and so on, but there are now a few kind of companies who are offering what's called you can look at historical images from your fields or from your farm. So you can look at, and when you look at those over, say, a series of 5 or 6 years, you can see just from the images of the field where the dodgy areas are, because the crop biomass looks less compared to the rest of the field. And it's things like that. I know pinpointing where the dodgy areas are will really kind of help you, or vice versa, also looking at where the productive areas are, so you can get that benchmark area where the productive part of the field is, and then contrast that with the unproductive part of the field.
David, is that the same for you? Dodgy areas, non-dodgy areas?
Yeah. As I say, I use again, as one of my major textbooks, I still go back to like the 1950s of things like Newman Turner talking about fertility pastures, and always compare with your hedgerows what you've got in terms of potential for structure, potential for organic matter, and so on. You know, hopefully you never fertilize your hedgerows, and yet they keep growing and they keep producing a crop every year. So it's a benchmark against where we can look for good soil health. So yeah, it's something that I totally agree with what both Jim and Andy have just said. Understanding where your areas are. I've got one. I walk my dog in the morning. There's a field just near me which last year grew a great crop of potatoes in it, and this year it's had grass down since the autumn, but you can distinctly see the rows of where the potatoes were and where these owners left better drainage over the winter. And I'm itching to get out there with a spade just to go and see why there's better, which parts are growing better, which parts are growing worse, and why. Having an inquiring mind is a great starting point to understand what's going on with your soils. And don't, as I say, the big thing is always starts with, don't be afraid to go out with a spade and have a look and dig something up and see if that gives you an answer to start off with, be it compaction, be it worm counts, be it looking at the shallow and deeper structures of your soils, and where's the water being held, and is it managing to get down through the system.
You've got all of these measurements, all of this data. I mean, David, can you suggest, and I guess everybody's probably got their own way of doing things and probably their own software package, but without it being a sort of a big an advert for what you do yourselves, can you suggest any software packages to help record basic field data and soil analysis, something better than Planet? And this is the question that I mentioned from Anne Wilcox, who's a farmer who's looking for some way of recording, I guess, this is sort of basic field data and soil analysis, these results that people are looking to record.
Yeah, you mentioned Planet. It is again, we talked about base points and base marks. It's a base starting point. There's a lot of good software out there at the moment where we're looking as a company at the moment for we're part of a bigger group, and the group are looking at maybe developing our own software or adapting something that's out there or available at the moment. There's some very good packages from Farm Plan, from Muddy Boots, from quite a wide variety of software packages out there. And again, it's what's right for you. It's some people want stuff that you can link into your combine, into your spraying, into your fertilizer applications. For some people, that is not necessary. The key is to have something that works for you. So sorry, not to be more specific. I don't want to advertise too many different people at any one sort of time.
Sure. I mean, and at Farmers Weekly, we're a broad church in terms of our readership, and we cover the whole spectrum of farms. And again, there are software packages out there. But Andy, I mean, can this sort of stuff be done on some, not quite maybe the back of a fag packet, but an Excel spreadsheet? Could that be any good?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it could, but again, as David just said, with the way technology is going now, you can get everything sent into your cab or onto your phone when you're standing in the middle of a field or whatever. So I think compatibility is crucial in that if you're using, whether it's Farm Plan or Muddy Boots or whatever, if you go to a kind of specialist company to get soil mapping, whatever done, you want to make sure that the outputs are then compatible to go into your package, your Muddy Boots or Gatekeeper, whatever you're using. And I think, most organizations will make sure that compatibility is there. But I think this was something that was touched on right at the beginning, though, is that you can get all of this data, but you do need to have, for want of a better word, an expert or a specialist to help you interpret it, because there's so much data that can be collected using the technology that you get now. But unless you really have an understanding on how to interpret that data, whether it's soil conductivity that's been measured, or the different approaches for if you're measuring kind of microbial diversity or whatever, it's being able to consult with a kind of trained agronomist or a specialist company who can help you interpret that data so that you can get the best out of it. Because, I've seen so many examples of growers who've had loads of data kind of shoved into their kind of 20-year-old laptop or computer, which sits a dusty computer sitting in the corner of an office, and they just don't know what to do with it. I'm not a fan of collecting data for data's sake. You want relevant data, but you also want to be able to interpret it. And if you can't interpret it yourself, then speak to your friendly agronomist.
I mean, Muddy Boots, Gatekeeper, I mean, other software packages are available, of course, Jim.
Of course, yes, yeah.
Jim, what would you recommend for somebody wanting to record basic field data and soil analysis?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I have to make up now for having admitted to digging in dodgy places as well. Probably arrived back to a slap wrist from human resources. But anyways, of course, I totally agree with what Andy was just saying there about converting data into action is absolutely fundamental and crucial in this. Clearly, yes, I could talk at length about the data packages and services that we offer from Frontier and SOIL. I think what's important is that you remember what you recorded and where you put it. You may be like me and have a stack of folders next to your desk, and that's the way you do things and you run things. But where we're very sophisticated, obviously, with technologies, for example, we offer apps that allow you in the field to record what you've got there, take photos, take note of where you are, use GPS, but you may also use things like 3 words, for example, and a simple notepad that note-taking app on your phone that allows you to store all of that. I think when we look at what we can do behind the scenes of where we can then take that soil data and measure it against farm performance in general, yield data, for example, and again over years how that changes, and taking into account then satellite data on biomass images, et cetera, it becomes more and more sophisticated, and we can get more and more layers into farm performance out of that. And again, then with the help of people trained in interpreting that data, I think we can convert that into action and into real pragmatic approaches to management.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks. We've got probably 2 or 3 minutes left. I'm going to go around the panel and ask you sort of one simple question. This has been all about taking stock of your soil, of our soil as farmers. If there's one sort of take-home message that you would want to give viewers, give Farmers Weekly readers from this session, what would it be? And I'm going to start with you, David.
For me, as I say, my biggest message is don't be afraid to just get out with a spade. We've talked a lot about big data and all sorts of things, but you can get lost in that, and don't forget the obvious. Make sure you test your soils, make sure you look at your soils, make sure you investigate your soils and know what you're looking at. And if you don't know what you're looking at, get help.
Andy, how about you?
Yeah, it's a farmer will know his fields, and if something changes, though, for example, an area of the field that's usually been quite productive suddenly is not producing as well as it should, then investigate it. And it could be a soil issue, it could be a pest or a disease issue, but it's if anything's out of the ordinary, go and check it. But I think get to know your soils, learn a bit more about the biology, the physics and the chemistry of soil. Not asking you to kind of go and buy a book or anything, but just be aware that all of those 3 things kind of interact, and if you get it right, then you're going to get productive land and good crops out of it.
We started with you, Jim. I think it's only probably fair to give you the last few words. How about you? Carry a spade is what David said. Get to know your soil. It's what Andy said. How about you?
Absolutely, I agree. I think that farmers are experts in their own soils, for sure. And even though this is a very complicated field, there are some simpler approaches to getting to know your soil. But I think it's the old adage, you need to measure to manage. You need to understand what you have in order to manage it. And in the way that the world is changing and the way that we need to look at building resilience into farming systems in every way, financially, ecologically, and so on, understanding soils is becoming more and more important.
Well, thank you, everyone. Jim Stotzker from Frontier Ag, David Newton from Timac Agro, and Dr. Andy Evans from CHAP. Thank you very much. Just a reminder for those who to those viewers who do want to see the second part of this soil summit, do stay connected until the end of the broadcast, and do send us your questions, and do please fill in the survey on the screen or the long survey in the resource area, and as I say, thank you very much for watching this and for taking part. And I'd now like to introduce our second video from Farm Plan. So see everybody in a few minutes, but for our first panel, thank you very much.
We're here today at Woldtop Brewery in Yorkshire, working with Sustainable Landscapes and their partners as they take their first soil samples for the Carbon Bank project.
The data capture bit that Cirrus offers for us, I think, is really exciting. My job in the field is to try and coordinate lots of different variables to do with the soil and the plant. Data has a massive value. Our first introduction to Cirrus was as a platform to help us manage the data related to a carbon capture program.
The project started some time ago when we started measuring what was happening on farm. We started to realise that all of the efficiency savings that we were developing on farm also started to reduce the carbon footprint of farming activities.
So Farm Plan have been learning over the last 12-18 months the importance of sort of carbon and sustainability within the agricultural industry as it's becoming more prevalent. Projects like Sustainable Landscapes are able to use this data to add benefit to existing packages and existing clients by now giving them sort of options around sustainability and carbon offsetting.
I think that we've all become aware over the last 5 or 6 years that there is a bit of an issue with climate change and carbon getting into the atmosphere. It's incumbent on us all to try and do our bit to reduce that, to make a better world for the next generation.
For me, the Cirrus platform is going to allow us to be a lot more accurate, a lot more flexible with the data that we collect. The data that we're generating and the ability to watch that data change gives us credibility, that builds confidence.
Our partnership with Farm Plan, and of course through the Gatekeeper software, is really paramount. Using data permissioned by farmers, we're able to then measure and then record and then feed back information to farmers as to cause and effect of what they're doing with regard to cover crops and reduced cultivation and all other elements that lead toward carbon being sequestrated in UK arable soils.
Soil sampling in the future is going to be really, really important. There's much more with elms. Farm Assurance are asking for more and more soil samples. The depth of knowledge that they're asking for.
The way we grow the barley and the effect that that's having on the landscape and the environment and the soil is definitely becoming more important to consumers.
Because Proagrica have access to the RELX CO2 hub, as a business we're able to understand our carbon footprint and we're able to look at ways of reducing this, as well as using Steve and the Carbon Bank to offset our carbon footprint.
This is very definitely a collaboration, farmer-driven, that engages with everybody along that journey.
Hello and welcome back to our Farmers Weekly Transition Summit on Successful Soil. I'm Transition Editor Johan Tasker. In part 2 of this summit, we're going to be looking at ways to improve soil health. We're going to be doing that and looking at how improvements can help create a farming system which is more resilient economically and environmentally. We'll be looking at a raft of ideas and how they can make a real difference in the field and on your farm. And I'm joined by 3 special guests, all experts in their own right. Between them, they have a raft of experience. First, we have Mari Dawson, Agriculture Product Research and Development Manager for Grass Specialists, Barrenbrug. Mari is well placed to advise on the best grass, forage and other beneficial crops to increase productivity. We have Simon Revel, Export Sales Manager for Claydon Drills. Simon runs the export department at Claydon and specialises in soil and sustainable crop establishment systems. And last but by no means least, we have Scott Garnett from ICL UK and Ireland. Scott is an agronomist and he says he has the best job in the world, spending all his time in the field, working with farmers and on how to use fertilizers more effectively. I'd also like to welcome everybody who's listening, who's watching, and I'd urge you all, if you have your own questions to ask, please do ask them throughout the session, and we will try to get them answered. Okay, improving soil health. Where do we start? Scott, what are your thoughts?
Well, how do we measure soil health is probably the easiest way to start with. There's so many different factors that we can look at when we start to say, how do we improve our soil? The big thing is, why do we want to improve our soil? If we can improve the quality of our soil, that we raise the nutrient levels, raise the organic compounds in those soils, and we actually makes farming a lot easier, or makes growing crops a lot easier. Not farming, sorry, I apologize for that one. So if we can, as an industry, improve our organic compounds in the soil that actually bind the soil together, it will really help us. But when we measure soil health, it's really, we got to look at chemical, physical, and biology, soil biology, and those are the big 3 factors that I would actually start to say that is where I would start to look at soil health. And
Mari, how about you? In terms of setting out to make an improvement, where should we start?
I completely agree with what Scott's just said there. We're always looking at the 3 different factors: the chemical, the physical, and the biological, because all those things have to work together. It's a bit like the old adage of the 3-leg milking stool. If one leg is missing and one leg isn't up to scratch, then that doesn't support the whole system. So I would be back to basics. Start with the basics. pH is certainly a very fundamental thing that we find on the grass and forage side of things, and then once you've got the basics right, you can start to get more targeted and more specific after that.
Simon, get the basics right first, yes?
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, for me, structure is key, or one of the key factors, as well as the other aspects of it. And I don't think there's still enough tension. There's more awareness now about soil structure to depth, but if you start making sure that that's good, you start from a good point. And particularly when you're transitioning into a if you like, a direct drill or no-till system, you've got to make sure that soil structure to depth is absolutely in tip-top order. And it takes a bit of time. Yes, there's a lot of work involved in getting that, but it's a bit like a foundation on a house. You get that right, and it's going to stand you in good stead.
And in terms of that time that it takes, how long should it take? How long are we looking at?
I think, the first thing for me when we're advising customers, and we do an awful lot of advice, educational selling, because it's important that, when you're transitioning from a traditional system with everybody used to it and comfortable with it, to move into a system that in a lot of cases is still seen quite radical. You really do need to understand your soils, your structure, and I'd agree that your pH is, what's actually happening with the makeup of the soil in your indices, so you can understand the full spectrum. But I mean, subsoiling, for example, to get that right, yes, you can use plants, you can use cover crops, but steel may still have to be used. And you can't always do that in the first year, because if the soil is very wet, then you certainly don't want to be subsoiling at that time. So it may take some time to get the structure right. But we're finding that without promoting us too much with the tine system, we stand more of a chance without having a negative effect on yield. And advice, if you've got somebody that's able to talk to you, your agronomist who understands soil and structure, get that advice. And make sure that you do it at the right time as well. Don't do it when it's dry just after harvest, because that will give you a false impression. The best time is, when there's humidity in the soil, maybe during the latter autumn, certainly into the spring, providing that the weather conditions are normal, and then have a good look down and use a spade, because that can tell you an awful lot what's going on.
Scott, Simon says, get some advice. That must be music to your ears as an agronomist.
It is. I would say that every farm, well, most farmers I deal with have an agronomist on site or working with an agronomist. It's really important, especially if we look at the situation that's going on now with prices going through, and we've got to look at nutrient use efficiency on everything that we put on there. We want to make sure that if we're putting a kilo of fertilizer on there, that we want to try and get a kilo of fertilizer into the crop. I know that's pretty impossible, but we should be striving towards those kind of levels, and having a good agronomist on site that can advise you on soil quality and plant physiology is critical for that.
I'd like to come on to the subject of sort of nutrient uptake efficiency and that kind of thing later on. But I mean, from your point of view, Scott, there's still a place for the traditional sort of cultivations, or do you see more and more people moving away from the plough, as it were?
Depending on the crop that you're growing, but the majority of the farmers I deal with now that I'm working with on R&D projects, they do very little to their soil now. It's about leaving the soil alone as much as possible, letting it recover and let it build itself. If the more we disturb that soil, the more we're going to disturb the soil life, and the soil life is the main area that breaks down those organic compounds and actually builds the quality of our soils.
And Mari, in terms of the R&D that you do as a research and development manager for Barenbrug, I mean, is that the sort of the message that you're picking up as well? Or is it grass and forage that is slightly different?
I would say there's certainly much more discussion about what we're sort of referring to as min-till reseeding approaches now. People are getting more aware that they are releasing carbon every time they are ploughing up, but also it's just as the others have said there, the disturbance to the soil microbiology. The big thing that I would, something Simon touched on earlier on, I would agree with, is just as they move to these practices, they have to be very much aware of the soil structure and making sure that they are addressing that, because traditionally they have always used ploughing as a way to address poor soil structure or compacted soils.
We have got some questions coming through already. I'd like to encourage everybody who's watching, who has a question, to just sort of pop it in the box, to submit it to us, and we'll try and get some of those answered in a few moments. Moving as little soil as possible then, and I think all three of you have almost said that is really, really important. Simon, I guess at Claydon that goes without saying almost.
Yes, I mean, we have to take what Jeff Claydon has experienced in 20 years. I mean, he's not moved the soil hardly at all, apart from having the drill through the soil. And more by default, we started to notice real changes in the soil, its ability to cope with drier periods, which we are experiencing. It doesn't matter, whether this is in the UK, but I mean, I travel, pretty extensively, and all areas are experiencing protracted dry periods and very heavy, intense rainfall periods as well, some heavier than others. And what we've noticed with the customers that are running the system, and have adopted it, is that it's able to cope more, and that's down to the glues, the activity that's going on, and the less you move the soil. I mean, one thing I would add, that when you turn soil over and expose it to the UVs, it kills an awful lot of the soil biota. And that they all work together as one. And then obviously you've got exudates from the plants that are actually from the plant roots that are actually encouraging that rhizosphere. So all the bacteria, the fungus and algae and everything else are all interacting. And when we move it, we actually destroy it. So, and this is maybe something more by default that we're starting to fully understand in the last few years. And it really does make a difference. And it makes the soils much more resilient to these weather events that we're getting. And it also helps, obviously, the function, as Scott said, and he's probably better suited to answer that one, where you're getting the exchange of the nutrients, and the nutrients are becoming available to the plants. And, there could be some reasons why we're finding some places that nitrogen inputs are being reduced. And that's going to be a significant problem now, maybe going forward. But some people are finding that they can reduce that without having an effect on yield.
And Scott, is that what you're seeing as well? I mean, that you can reduce those inputs without having the effect on yield? I mean, because I'm thinking things like nutrient holidays, P&K holidays. Some people will be looking at that because of the situation in terms of prices and availability of things like fertilizer. But at the same time, it can be a bit of a dangerous thing. It's a two-edged sword, as it were.
I think it's a risky thing to actually reduce any amounts of fertilizer to a field. I understand at the moment with the costs of nitrogen and all fertilizers that, from a farmer's perspective, it would be, in their opinion, to reduce it. But I would always start, if I'm going to do something like that, if I want to make sure I'm getting more nitrogen out of my soil, I'd look at the elements that actually make a difference to the availability of nitrogen. So very simply with soil science, as we get mineralized nitrogen or available nitrogen in the soil, you need a certain amount of sulfur and a certain amount of potassium there to actually, for the crop to absorb that nitrogen. So I would recommend that, when we do a soil analysis, that do a full spectrum soil analysis. I know it's double the cost, but it can probably save you a lot of money in the long run of just looking at you being more efficient with those nutrients that you're putting on there.
I would agree 100%.
Yeah, same here. Everything has to be in balance, and if you reduce what you're doing with one element, you're not just impacting what that element does; it's impacting into all the other ones, whether it's making others more available or less available.
So when it comes to this sort of roots versus iron approach, then Mari, balance is key for you.
Yeah. Balance is key, absolutely.
It's that we have Leipzig's law, and you can basically say that whatever your limiting factor is the limiting factor you're going to get to your yield potential. So by having a full spectrum soil analysis, you can see what your issues are, and you can correct them, and then improve your nutrient uptake and your yield and your quality.
Yeah. And from my experience, there's still not enough soil analysis done. Because I think, Mari, you'd probably agree, and Scott, I'm sure you would, that, it is expensive and it's time consuming, but I think it's very, very important. And you can then start to fine tune.
Yeah, I think you're right there. It is seen as an expense, but I think it can give you so much value. One thing as well that I'd just like to bring up is since 2018, it's actually a legal requirement for there to be soil samples in England and Wales that are under 5 years old. And I don't think that message has got out to the industry as widely as it should. We still have people that we speak to that don't know that.
I think all FACTS advisors will give that advice. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So a question here. Let's sort of ask some questions from farm manager Phil Stone from JF Cobb and Sons. He says, if the key is for minimal soil disturbance, how can we achieve this, especially if glyphosate isn't an option in the future? I mean, glyphosate is an option at the moment, but so let's take that in sort of two parts. Is it, Simon, just a case of doing nothing, and how could we achieve minimal soil disturbance if glyphosate isn't an option in the future?
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting one on the glyphosate one. We'll put that to the background because I have my own thoughts on that, and I'm going to keep that to myself because truthfully, I can't see how we could farm without glyphosate because I think dear old couch grass might rear its head again and create a major problem. But anyway, on the question of straw management using very shallow cultivations, fast cultivations directly after harvest so that we can encourage as much of the volunteers, broadleafs and grass weeds to grow, using the straw harrow again to deal with that. Yes, we may have to use depending on how bad the pressure is, we may have to perhaps cover that 3-4 times, which we do regularly, but the cost is very low. Fuel consumption is very low. We also, it helps us with the residue management and also the chaff, so that when we're establishing oilseed rape in particular, it really does help the crop get away. We're retaining moisture in the soil in the very hot areas, then it works as a mulch. So that's quite important. And then a robust, generally we would use a robust application of glyphosate and then seed. We've also developed an inter-row hoe, and with the banding coulter, because we band the seed, making sure that you get a good establishment so it tries to keep swamp as much as the black grass, if it's black grass, as possible. And then we start to hoe as soon as we can when the conditions are right in the spring. So we're able to control black grass both, in a cultured way, both with chemical, we still use various chemicals, and mechanically use it as well. And sometimes the hoeing in the spring has a benefit because it will mineralize some nitrogen and just push the crop on a little bit. So there is a way that it can be done, but attention to detail. We did some experiments a few years ago where we were checking the frequency and the length of the straw harrow to deal with the grass weeds. And the key would be is don't let the grass weeds get too big, so that the straw harrow can deal with them, and it's quite effective. So yes, it can be done.
Thanks. Scott?
Well, you've asked the wrong kind of agronomist. My kind of agronomist. All my qualifications are in plant physiology and soil science. I'm facts registered, but I try and keep away from chemical applications. But I personally don't think that we can grow without chemical applications. I think it's, I know we do in organic situations, but for conventional farming, if we want to feed the world, we will need to use a certain amount of chemicals. But that's as far as I can go on that subject. I don't want to really go out of my depth, make a bad mistake or bad recommendation.
I mean, Mari, I'm going to come to you in a minute, but I'm going to stick with I'm going to stick with Scott. There'll be I know that there are going to be people watching this who are going to be saying, stuff like Mintil is just not for me. And there are going to be people watching this who are saying that so Mintil is the only way forward. It does require a really, really big leap of faith for a lot of farmers to sort of to go down the regen route, to use fewer chemicals, to adopt Mintil, to do all of that kind of stuff. And Simon, I'm going to come back to you after this. But for the moment, Scott, I've got this question here from Seb Challoner, who sort of recognises this. Sometimes this debate can be really, really divisive within farming itself, and also with consumers and with farmers. So how can we support conventional farmers or encourage conventional farmers to adopt farming practices that aid soil health, that improve soil health? And what, there are probably going to be financial barriers stopping farmers adopting these methods as well. There's a question from Seb Challoner. So Scott, if you could, I know it's a long question, but try and keep the answer it's fairly brief for now. I'll ask Simon and then we'll go to Mari.
Right. So how do we get farmers to actually? We have to incentivize them. I think we have to help them. It's helping everybody by improving the capture of carbon, or the less carbon that's released from our soils. Carbon is a big word. Everybody's talking about it at the moment. And how can we do more? How can we become carbon neutral? which in my opinion will never ever happen. It might happen on a Thursday afternoon in 30 years time, and then we'll have to plant more trees because on Friday we won't be carbon neutral. But I think we can reduce the amount of carbon that we use as an industry. But from the farmer's perspective, if you improve your quality of soil, this is what is it 95% of the global food production comes out of that first 15 centimeters of soil. With the human race wouldn't exist without that topsoil that we're working on. So the more that we can actually do to improve that area, the higher yields we're going to get, the better quality, the more nutrient use efficiency we're going to get. So we tick lots of boxes, but it does take a while. And I understand from a farmer's perspective that I'm going to spend this money, how long before I get my return on my investment? And I don't know those numbers. I presume Simon would be better on that than I would, really.
Simon, I mean, your livelihood, I guess, is dependent on what you do. How do you persuade people to take that step change?
I think education is key, and supporting those farmers. Obviously, we have there's early adopters, as there is in anything, that have taken that leap of faith. But what we found is it's profitability is key. Whether you're running a farm or an engineering business, whatever. And we've found that by reducing the cost, the significant cost, and this is where the whole development came from back in 2000. Those of you remember when wheat was at £60 a tonne, there was farmers in real problems. And this is what motivated Jeff to come up with the system. And he realised that if you go back to the 70s, when direct drilling was the first, with the dear old gramoxone and ICI's incentives and what have you, that it wasn't sustainable. And various people through, when we've come into a tight period, have tried direct drilling. But the key point with that is making sure that you get the soil, the rooting. Rooting is key, getting the roots down into the ground. And what we found was that we could reduce the cost quite dramatically. And without 2/3 of establishment costs. The AHDB recently did a survey from their 20 monitor farms, and it was quite staggering, the differences. And it's there, those of you that can get onto the AHDB, it's quite interesting. So we would be 1/3 of the costs using the Claydon system without having a detriment effect to yield. And the common thing is that as soon as somebody says, oh, well, I'm going to go direct drilling, then I'm going to lose yield. So therefore, my profitability is down. So when you start, incentivizing, the incentivize that we talk about is a reduction in costs, better productivity, improvement in the soil health. So all of those things then help, but it's not an instant fix. You've got to run with it and stick with it for 2-3 years, and then you really start to see some serious improvements. But immediately you get that cost saving. And what we found where we've adopted it, and this is just not in the UK. I mean, I was in Germany last week, and we've got farmers up in the Emden area, which is up on the North Sea coast, which they're 800 millimeters of rain. And those guys are getting success with the system in some very difficult soils because it's all below sea level. And it's not like the fens, it's like some of the stuff that we've got around the coast of the UK with lots of silt and clay and what have you. So I think, from where we're coming from, there is a benefit there. I think incentivizing people to go down that route is definitely a good thing, but the incentive is there in the cost savings. And if it's done properly, and this is why we spend so much time working closely with farmers to make sure that they understand, because we've made mistakes, and it's not just a case of, oh, well, you just go out and drill direct. You've got to understand what you're doing with residue management, with the weeds and timings and stuff like that. So it's very, very important. We spend an awful lot of time. And I think that from the experience that I've had over the years is by helping farmers, they appreciate it. And that gives them the confidence to then adopt it.
And Mari, you take a similarly long-term view in what you do?
Absolutely. And the other thing is, I think this is almost a bit of a psychology question. There is a resistance to change out there often. Something we often hear is, oh, well, we tried things like that years ago and they didn't work, so we don't do it. It's that old, it's aye been, is a saying we have all up in Scotland. It's always been. But there's been so many things have moved on. Plant breeding has moved on, so the species are different. The varieties within the species are different. Machinery's moved on. Fertilizer, chemistry, it's all moved on. There are things that we need to go back and readdress and look at again. I think the other thing is, as someone that goes out and advises people, and I try to help them, I always come at it from the approach of, if this was my farm, what would I do with it? And the big thing is, you've got to get buy-in from the people you're with, and you have to realize that every single farm is different. Every field in every farm is different. There is always something somebody can do. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the same thing that their neighbour is doing. It's not, Scott might come up with a different suggestion than I might on one farm. And it's about having that discussion and not saying you must do this. It's saying what can we do to help you? And Simon made a very good point there. Cost saving, but it's also value creating. Often we see things as a cost, but what is the value of this activity that we're going to do? And it might not be an immediate value. I think often, particularly with long-term crops such as perennial grasses, maybe the benefits aren't obvious 5 months after they're sown. It's maybe something, benefits come in the second year and third year and fourth year. So there's a bit of patience required often as well.
And cost is a huge thing. I mean, I've worked in the sector for over 20 years, and I've never known a time really like this, especially when it comes to things like fertilizers, as we all know. But Mari, are you seeing an increased interest in cover crops to increase soil fertility rather than sort of sprayed fertilizers? A question from Sandy Fisher, who's a grower. Could organic farming principles almost be the answer? I'm not saying should we all go organic, but should we be adopting more of those practices? Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, certainly. And I think this is almost right back to the start and back to basics. I think organic farming practices have made sure that certainly the grassland side of things, from my experience, they're really up there with their use of legumes and forage herbs, and certainly having soil pH is high so that they can plant, the whole system is healthier almost. So if you want to adopt in legumes, for example, to save on nitrogen inputs, you have to have a soil medium there that is going to support those legumes to get the best out of them. But absolutely, we are getting a more broad range of questions from a more broad range of end users, farmers, than we have ever had before. And people aren't open to what else could I try. It's really refreshing. It's brilliant. I know it's come from a negative thing, but it is brilliant that we are having these conversations now.
And so much of farming is often trying to get a positive out of a negative. I mean, Scott, what are you seeing out there?
Much the same as I just said. People are looking at organic farming and saying, how can how do those guys do it? How do they manage the soils and everything else? And I agree. I think it's to have such conversations about soils is fantastic. But yeah, most farmers I deal with now, it's how do I get more out of my soil? How do I make everything more efficient? How do we get better yields? How do we get better quality? All from the soil, and everybody is looking at that soil. It's such a resource that we've got and that we have to look after. But yeah, I would say I would agree, and a lot of the farmers are talking to us about that and asking those kind of questions.
And using things like cover crops, though, it's not even that. It's not without its problems. In terms of a question here from Philip Meadley, who says, "How do we best stop the build-up of slugs when using cover crops in a wet drilling time?" What would you say to that, Scott?
I don't know. We are seeing a lot more slugs out there. I was in some cereal crops earlier this week, and relatively damp fields, quite a few slugs around it. All we can probably do is roll the field at the right time of year. But when you've got a cover crop in there, obviously you can't roll that. We can graze them off with sheep. Would that help? Again, there's factors we can look at, but again, I wouldn't know as a chemical application what we could do and what we couldn't do on that area.
And Simon, from a Claydon point of view, what about slug management?
Yeah, mechanical. It's amazing what a straw harrow will do. It doesn't actually kill the slugs. Yeah, you might bash one or two around, but disturbing the slug eggs and exposing them to the sunlight is quite a good way. And we're pretty cautious about using slug pellets, so that certainly helps. And I think because we're not disturbing the soil, there'll be more predation as well. The carabid beetles and that sort of thing. We're certainly finding that. So that does help. But yes, it can be a problem, and obviously the wetter periods that we're having as well tends to help. I think the broader rotation helps, and we're certainly seeing that. I see that in other parts of Europe where people are growing a lot. Their rotations are much broader, so we've not got this really tight rotation, and I think that will start to change as well. So there's a help there where you're not perhaps got rape so often in the rotation. But cover crops, yeah, that's a tough one. That is. There has been some work done on that where you've got much more natural predation because you're relying on more. You're not disturbing the soil, so you're not breaking up, all some of the natural predation that's there. So yes, it's a tough one though. It is a tough one.
Is the issue of slugs something that comes up when you're advising people about cover crops, Maury?
It is, yeah. We've actually seen some issues of that causing problems in grass reseeds as well. I think my colleagues here have covered quite a lot of things, and the other one would be that when you are establishing a crop, is getting that seed bed, as fine as possible. I know what you were trying to talk about a balance here about how much we use with soil disturbance, but if trying to get a finer seed bed where it's not cloddy, that which is something that's attractive to slugs.
And a question here it's not actually a question, it's some advice from Andrew Wilson, farmer, who says about slugs in cover crops, the biggest change here, he says, has come from thinner cover crops. It's the bit underground that makes the difference. Is that something that you'd agree with, Maury?
I'm not sure really what he means there by the bit underground that makes the difference. Is that about? Does he mean? Is he referring to root systems there?
I guess quite possibly, yes. Or the thinner systems underground. I'm not too sure myself, but that's what he says. Let's move it on. Andrew, if you want to come back on that, and you're still online, do drop us another message, and it's the same for anybody else. If you want to ask a question, just use the facility and send us a question through, and we will try and get them answered. Going on to look at nutrients themselves. Because of the high cost of things like nitrogen, nutrient use efficiency is going to be really, really important. Scott, what's the best way to go about it and improve your nutrient use efficiency?
Like I said, is understanding what's in your soil. And also look at the interactions of the nutrients that you're putting on there. We know that the phosphate and potassium will hang around a relatively long time in the soil, so we're not really prone to leach. We can lose phosphate from running out of a field, from soil running out of a field. But you really look at your mobile nutrients. So we look at nitrogen, will leach through the soil. So we'll do sulfur, will leach through the soil, and it's being aware of what you've got available at that period of time. So we're doing quite a bit of work of research at the moment within ICL looking at capturing mineralized nitrogen at the end of the year. Obviously, as soil temperatures heat up over the summer period, we have a lot of nitrogen, and usually at that time we've harvested the crop out, and there's no crop there to really take it up. And because we've got the Clean Air Act has come in, and we've got very low levels of sulfur dioxide being dropped out of the atmosphere now. It's gone from about 130 kilos down to about 1 to 5 kilos per hectare on average. So we're seeing sulfur deficiencies right across the UK. So I know that Land Crop and NRM have actually put out data that you can get hold of that show that UK soils, about 97% of UK soils are actually deficient for sulfur. And if you start with that as your limiting factor, like we said earlier on, sulfur is critical to actually for a plant to absorb nitrogen from the root system. It's critical for clover or your legumes. If you want to improve nodulation on peas and beans or any kind of legume, you need a small amount of sulfur in there for those bacteria to work. And it's very much the same with the plant. So if you're putting your nitrogen on and your nutrient levels are not right in the soil to actually capture as much of that as possible, you're throwing a certain percentage of that away. You could be losing quite a large percentage, in some cases up to 20% of the total N just not being, just lost.
So, Simon, Scott mentions the situation in the UK. You've already said that you were out in Germany. I understand you've also been out in Kazakhstan. We sort of, we know from the awful situation in Ukraine that we're all in a way connected. Is there anything that UK farmers can learn from farmers in Germany and Kazakhstan in terms of getting the best from the nutrients that they apply to their soils?
I think the UK and Germany are fairly close to what they're doing. There's a lot of work. I remember many years ago that I had one group of farmers from Germany say to me that they looked upon the UK as being the leaders, and then they felt that the Germans became the leaders in various crop establishment ways, and then it swung back to the UK again. So I think as far as Western Europe is concerned, we're quite closely linked, and there's a lot of work and a lot of interchange of data. So I think, but when you start traveling further east, there's an awful lot of things could be better as far as crop establishment is concerned. The one biggest problem that I have is soil structure and the lack of attention to soil structure, which is really, a fundamental, as Mari said earlier, that's a fundamental requirement to make sure that you've got good soil structure to depth, irrespective of what's going on with the indices in the soil. But there's some farms that won't. I ask the question, where are you with your pHs, and they don't even know what their pH is. There's not enough testing goes on. Check, for example, that's an obligation that they have to do every 5 years. Is that enough? Maybe not, with the weather events that we're getting. So I think there's an awful lot that can be done further afield. And, this thing that's going on in Ukraine is going to focus people's mind. Scott and I were talking about it with sunflower oil. When you think that Ukraine has 8 million hectares of sunflower that they grow, and the chances are that's going to be depleted. I think Ukraine and Russia together supply about 8% of the sunflower oil in the world. So, the sort of things that are going on, we've got to try and get more with less. We've got to try and produce more. I mean, interesting point, maybe relative or not, China dropping the 1 child per family because they realised they weren't going to have enough people going forward to look after the older generation. Well, you imagine you've got 1.3 billion people, and all of a sudden that increases quite dramatically because the population goes up. And, we've got yields aren't increasing, are they? Yields have been flat for some time now. So we've got to try and get more with less. So I think there's a lot more that can be done. I'm not saying that we've got, as an industry, feeding the world is our main aim, isn't it? Yes, we've got to be profitable. We've got to look after the soil as well. I mean, I have a big thing about soil erosion. And can you believe in that Emden area, which is as flat as our fens, you're even seeing soil erosion on land that is completely flat, and it's through over cultivations. And when you start looking at the amount of soil, the European Soil Bureau has done an awful lot of work on that. And I think soil erosion is something else that we've got to start thinking about. We don't always see it. You know, if you said to somebody you're losing a ton per hectare per year, a ton of soil isn't a very big heap. But if that carries on, so, and I think the things that we're doing with what Scott's talking about, with what Mari's talking about, you know, in this, we've got to start thinking about what's happening with our soils and looking after them much more.
Mari, Barrenbrook's also a global company, or the Barrenbrook Group. How do you sort of take, or do you take knowledge from other countries and apply it here, and look to see what we can learn? And can you give any sort of examples of that?
Certainly, being part of the group, we do have a bit of collaboration. We've sort of been, as grass breeders, we're able to take different genetics from different parts of the world and combine them. We've got a new variety that's just going onto the recommended list, which is a great example of that. It was bred in New Zealand. However, it has European genetics in it, so it's combined that long growing season with something that has winter hardiness to be able to be suitable for the UK market. In terms of more of the practical research, that's something that we're really just starting up now, is looking at more projects across the world where we can find synergies. There are a lot of synergies. I was in contact with my New Zealand colleagues, and they're having all the same pressures, and in terms of the public good, looking at more herbs and legumes. They understand, whilst they've got more freedom with what they do with chemicals, that may change going forward. So they maybe even talk to us about that. We might be able to help them too. But we've not worked on a lot of projects together yet, but that is something that's going to change.
Thanks, Mari.
One thing on that, Johan. Sorry, just on that, we have got various projects going on. We did have a sunflower project going on in Ukraine with an institute that was measuring what we were doing with sunflower to see if we could again reduce input costs with that. We've had various projects going on in Germany, Czech Republic as well, looking at, and it's the same drive. You know, it's the same. There's key drivers there that are driving the whole thing to try and get more and try and improve productivity and reduce costs as well.
We're getting a lot of messages about slugs here. That seems to become a bit of a thing. So John Hawkins says growing grass is unpalatable to slugs. Brassicas just accentuate it. Also, if you give slugs a food source while your main crop grows away, slugs are not an issue. We've got. Let's have a look here. Andrew Wilson's come back and said the roots improve the soil structure, but lower seed rates and less dense cover crops still capture carbon and soak up nutrients, but allow light and wind to get into the canopy, which facilitates weeds growing in the cover rather than in the cash crop, where they are cheaper to kill and allows easier drying off of the ground in the spring. I'm going to move it on a little bit. There's a question here from Sheila Reed. How do we keep heavy limestone clay soil well aerated under permanent pasture? Is slotting the best way? I don't want to turn this into the Claydon show, but so Simon, no. just quickly. I mean, how do we do that? Is slotting the best way? And then I'll come to Mari and then to Scott.
Well, I think again, get the spade out and have a look, see what depth it is. One important issue is it's all very well going in and working the soil, but you've got to understand exactly where the problem is, because there's no point, not being deep enough. And there's also another critical point is that if you are too deep and you get to what we call critical depth, where the machine can't actually break and fissure the soil, you can actually cause upward compaction and create if you like, a temporary mole, which could cause you problems with, ponding in the low point of the field. So it's really, really important. And also soil humidity. If you're going to start, low surface disturbance subsoiling is absolutely key, because you don't want to open the soil up and, dry it out or start, losing carbon, if you like. But the other key point with that is to make sure that you do it in the right soil conditions, when it's dry enough so it fissures the soil, make sure at the right depth, and you use something that doesn't open up the soil, but you reset it. So you put the fissures in, and then you reset it and reconsolidate it back down. But get a spade out, get a spade out and have a look. And the other thing is, a lot of people sometimes don't always do is, if when you're looking at the crop or the field, why is there a wet spot? Why does it always get wet? Is a drain blown if it's drained? And keep an eye what's going on, and visual looks sometimes can tell you an awful lot what's going on. But I would always encourage people to get the spade.
Mari, you could come back on that, but I've also got a question here from Andrew Adamson, who's a farmer in what he says is a wetter area of southern Scotland. He says, how often should we be grassland subsoiling? So touching on something that Simon's mentioned, how often should we be grassland subsoiling, and how do we incorporate farmyard manure into the ground without ploughing it for the next crop? We're a grassland farm in a wetter area of southern Scotland. Is that something that you can help with, Mari?
I mean, certainly in terms of the how often should we be subsoiling, I think looking at soil structure needs to become as routine as looking at soil fertility. And just back to what Simon said there, your spade is your best tool, your first tool, because you need to see how deep it is. There's such a variety of machines out there to deal with soil compaction now. If you have compaction that's 8 inches deep, there's no point going through with a machine that's only going to go 6 inches deep into the soil. You have to break through the base of that compaction. And conversely, one thing that Simon didn't say was, diesel's expensive now. We don't want to be burning diesel, pulling something really deep through the soil if your compaction's only from sheep over winter, making a pan in the top couple of inches. So there's benefits there. That absolutely, it needs to become much more routine as part of the soil fertility and soil structure. Both needs to become routine. And digging, unless it's somewhere where animals lie, digging a pit underneath a hedge can give you a good indication, a good example of how your soil should look, because if there's less pressure on those end rigs under hedges.
Scott, getting more bang for our bucks more important than ever. I mean, farmyard manure, you're seeing more of it. I would say you're seeing more of it being applied, but we know that there's confusion over the autumn applications of farmyard manure. I understand that is going to hopefully be resolved within the next few weeks or so. But farmyard manure, has it got more of a place, do you think?
I think it has, but unfortunately, it's all on the west coast of the majority. It's on the west coast of the UK, and we probably need it on the east coast, and it doesn't add up to actually shift it across the country. And we have to be very aware that when we're putting organic matter on there, especially organic compounds, that we're putting a lot of phosphate into our soil as well. It's in an organic form, so it's not available to the plant, but will be converted. But we have to make it. I think there has to be some government, I think, involvement here that helps us actually move this around the country, so we can get it to the soils that need it most.
I mean, we could move it around the country. It's probably easier to move livestock around the country than it is to probably more cost effective than shifting lorry loads of FYM. I mean, Scott, do you see there's more of a place for livestock in arable systems as we try to improve soil health, and almost back to the future approach, especially in the eastern region?
Well, we have the majority of the cattle or the livestock is on the west coast, because that's where the majority of the water falls. So we have a good quality grass production there, which is relatively cheap to maintain and grow. I think it would be a bit more difficult on the east side to actually to do that. We have areas in Cambridge that I think have less rainfall than the Sahara Desert. So it's how do you actually care for the beast? I think you would say it's easy to move them, and we can grow a certain amount of grass over there, but we'd never get the quality that we would get on the west coast, I feel.
Simon, reintroducing livestock in arable systems as a way of improving soil health.
I think, but it comes back to the experience and the expertise. If you think the amount of livestock production that's gone out of East Anglia, for example, having come in from a father that had cows, and cattle. I mean, one of the reasons that we don't put anything on the Claydon farm is the availability of it. Okay, we can get some chicken manure, but it's just not available. So it would be a difficult one, and there'd be many arable farmers, I'm sure, that would be probably shudder at the thought of having to go back into livestock again. So that I think could be a serious motivational problem.
I mean, Mari, I mean, joking apart, I mean, you're grassland specialists. You're based in Bury St Edmunds, which is the heart of East Anglia almost, and very much an arable area. What's your take on this thought?
Well, I'm obviously a Scot, and I live in an agriculture, a livestock area. But so I would also say livestock, bringing livestock back in is always going to be a benefit. But joking aside, I think it's looking at how we do it again. Scott said there, obviously we can potentially we're growing better grass in the west than we could in the east, but it's looking at what are we doing rather than having high yielding dairy cows that need a really high quality ryegrass sward. Perhaps we can look at some of the more drought tolerant species like the softleaf tall fescues, the modern cocksfoots that are much more palatable and have been developed for grazing. And perhaps we're looking at short term livestock, so it's looking at something like flying flocks of sheep, store lambs, something like that we can bring in temporarily, and it just starts that process. And obviously I think Simon there mentioned about the incentivization. There are a lot of young people out there that don't have access to land, that are looking for land, and I think we need to start a greater conversation and build greater relationships again.
A greater conversation indeed. We're almost out of time. We've got 3 minutes left, and I'm going to sort of go around and ask you you each this is a bit of a typical sort of journalist's question, really. What single thing can we do to improve soil health? And I'm not going to take this idea of measuring what we've got as being a good starting point. So given that we've measured and we know what we've got, what's the next step? Scott, I'll start with you.
I'm a great believer of getting as much organic compound as we can into our soils. Build the soil life in the soil. The greater the amount of soil life we've got in there, the whole process becomes a lot more manageable, and we can achieve those yields and achieve those qualities by having that. So for me, I would always lean on to or putting much more organic compound back into our soils.
Organic compound into soils. Mari, what about you? What are your thoughts?
Have a goal. Know what you're trying to achieve. It's all very well having your results and knowing what you've got, but where are you trying to take it? And I think that's something that's overlooked. You need to know where you're going, and then you can make a plan as to how to get there.
So, some good advice there. And finally, Simon, how about you?
I think understand what your soil, how it responds. Don't recreational tillage. Think about what you're doing, and with a greater understanding of what's going on within the soil, then I think then people would potentially have a benefit. And I think there needs to be more focus on looking after the soil, for various reasons, and get advice. I mean, we said earlier about if you're not sure, there's plenty of people out there that are willing to help. And the one thing that we have within this industry is people that are in it because they enjoy it, they want to be in it and make a difference. And I think there's, understanding what's going on within the soil is so important. And whether that's in a biological fact or whether it's a mechanical fact or another factor, just getting that advice. And there's so much. One thing within our industry, we're very good at giving free advice. There's plenty of seminars and webinars and meetings going on. And it always sometimes surprises me that you see the same faces at those meetings, and there's a lot more people than those same faces. And make use of that free advice. I mean, in most other industries, you'd have to pay for it. So there's plenty out there. And that would be my advice is to learn and understand and look and spend more time. I know that's sometimes more difficult because we're all rushing and tearing about But I think that for me would be the thing.
And that's some good advice in itself. So Simon Revel from Claydon Drills, Scott Garnett from ICL, and Mari Dawson from Barrenbrug, thank you very much for that. I think the message is know where you're going, get some advice, and for goodness sake, increase that organic content if you can. We need to wrap up the panel now. Just to say to everybody, thank you for watching. To our three expert panelists, thank you very much for participating. Thank you everyone for the questions. Please do fill in our survey to help us improve our webinars, our transition summits here at Farmers Weekly. The recording of both sessions will soon be available on demand, so you can watch it again if you want to, or indeed you can tell others about it and tell everybody else where to find it, which is of course on the Farmers Weekly website at www.fwi.co.uk/transition. So for now, thank you to everyone for taking part.
Thank you.
I'm Johan Tasker, transition editor. Goodbye. Thank you. Thanks.